Hey guys, welcome back. This is the eighth video of our Ruby on Rails frequently asked questions series. In this video, we will look at 10 more frequently asked questions. Okay, so let's start with the first question from this video. What is the difference between iterators and loops in Ruby? So both iterators and loops are used to repeat the execution of some statements for a n number of times, you can say. But iterator never falls in the infinite execution, but loop may fall into infinite execution if the condition is not defined properly or not defined correctly. And why iterators does not fall into infinite execution? Because iterator works over a finite range of elements or finite set of length of collection. Okay, now the second question is, what are accessor methods in Ruby? List and explain accessor methods. So accessor methods works as a getter and setter method, and you can use accessor methods like attribute reader, attribute writer, and attribute accessor. Where attribute reader works as getter method, and attribute writer work as setter method, and attribute accessor works as both reader, a getter and setter. What are class level and module level attributes? What is the difference between include and extend in Rails? So when you work with modules in Ruby or in Rails, then you might face some situation that where you want to include some, or where you want to use some modules in a Rails model. Okay, so when you use include and then module name, it means you are trying to use instance methods defined in that module. And when you use extend, it means that you are trying to use class methods available in that module. So include is used for using class methods of module, and extend is used for using, sorry, include is used for using instance method of module, and extend is used for using class method available in that module. How many template engines are supported by Rails? Which one is your preference and why? So there are three types of template engines supported by Rails, that is HTML, Slim, and the ERB. Where ERB is the default template engine supported by Rails, and for HTML and Slim, you can add some gems to support those template engines. Okay, and why? Which one is your preference? Is depends upon that which by which template engine you are more familiar with. For example, I'm familiar with ERB more. However, I can work with HTML and Slim as well, but I love ERB because it's so simple and I love simplicity. That's why I always prefer to work with ERB. However, you have to write more code than HTML and Slim template if you want to design a Rails template into ERB. What do you mean by singleton classes? So this question is asked to many of the developers in interviews, and you must have answered that. And when you implement this singleton classes at your end, you will get more better idea about that, and you can answer it clearly. What do you think is the right time to define a helper method inside a controller in Rails? Okay, so as we know that helpers are used to reduce the logic at the view level, or reduce the complex logic at the view level, so we can place them in helpers. But sometimes you have to define helper methods in your, or you need to define helper methods in your controllers as well. Okay, for example, if you defined helper action in application control, application helper, then those actions or those view logics are available for all the controllers in your application. Okay, but suppose if you want to define a method that should be reduce the views logic, or logic at the view level, and you want to use that method only for a particular controller, then there are two ways. Either you have to create a separate helper class for that controller, or you can define a single helper method in that controller. Okay, both ways can be fine, but rather than maintaining a file for a single helper action, it is better to define that action as a helper action into your controller itself. Okay, and this question has been asked to me by two clients. on Upwork when I applied for job and I write the proposal and then I got selected for that. And then two times in the span of 3 years, uh, two clients asked this question to me and I answered that. However, I got selected at one job and one at one I get rejected. But yeah, this question has been asked, and I believe if you have idea about that what are helper methods and how to define them in controller and when to define them in controller, then you can make a good impression on your interviewer. What is your understanding of dry code? Please explain. It depends upon the person to person. Okay, because for me, the dry code can be like just make it too dry or using concerns and modules and callbacks and filter actions to make my code dry and keep it clean. Okay, for you it might be some different like a add some library folders into your application and manage piece of chunks there, a common piece of chunks there and all that, and using concern classes. So it depends upon person to person that how they prefer to write to make their code dry. Okay, but the basic principle of dry is don't repeat yourself. Okay, so just try to ensure that you whatever you have write as a code in your application, just try to make sure that it has a single appearance in your project. Okay, for example, if you have write a query at one place, then just make sure that you haven't write that particular query in that file again. Okay, you can use action filters or you can use callbacks for that, and you can use concern for that. Okay, so now it depends upon how you prefer to make your code dry, so you can answer it based upon your experience and based upon your preferences. What is your approach to write a thin controller? Also explain why a controller should be thin and what are advantages of it. Controllers are the main aspect of a Rails application because controller performs most of the logic. For example, whenever a request come to your server identifies the request and it send it to the router, and then router decide that which controller should execute this request and which action of that controller should execute that. So if your controller is very fatty, then it means you are performing too much logic at the controller level. So rather than performing too much logic at the controller level, you can move that particular logic inside either inside model if it is related to database stuff like writing queries or fetching query, or you can mention them in before action callback. For example, if you are trying to get some data before any action executes, and this query requires it 3 to 4 or multiple actions, then just write that query in a callback, and rather than defining in every controller action, you can use concern classes to write thin controllers. Okay, and this is why a controller should be thin and how you can write your controller thin, and this is the approach that I use for making writing a thin controllers. Okay, so it also depends on you that how you will make your thin controller and what is your understanding of thin controllers. But yeah, it is clear that this is very specific question, and clients and your recruiter or interviewer really sincere about this question and they want to listen some specific answer, because if you have practiced a lot on this concept or writing dry code or making controller things, that means you have much better experience and much better mindset to writing code in Ruby on Rails or writing your controllers. Okay, so just try to write thin controllers always. What is the purpose of initializers directory in a Rails project? So this question can be asked from freshers or the developers who has kind of experience like let's say 1 year 6 months, or they have some internship with Ruby on Rails, because the purpose of initializer directory in your Rails project is to maintain the files which required at the time of the booting your Rails application. Okay, and you need, and this initializer directory exists inside the project config folder of your Rails project. Okay, and where you can use files which you want at the time of the booting level. For example, like if you use device, then you can use device.rb in initializer, and you can have some other configuration files as well inside the initializers. Okay, so this is the purpose of initializer directory in a Rails project. Okay, so these are the 10 questions from this video. I hope you liked it, and thanks for watching this, and let's meet into the another video with 10 more frequently asked questions. Okay, till then, tata, goodbye, take care, and stay safe, and subscribe the channel for more.